Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid and these are the headlines. The United States has reported 1,157 COVID-19 deaths and over 73,000 cases in the last 24 hours. The total number of infections in the country has surpassed 4.1 million, with nearly 146,000 deaths. In Brazil, 1,156 more people have died from the virus, increasing the tally to over 85,000. Meanwhile, Pakistan has recorded 24 deaths overnight, taking the toll to 5,787, with nearly 272,000 cases. Globally, the death count has exceeded 638,000, with cases top 15.6 million. Indian troops have martyred 2 more civilians in occupied Kashmir. The occupation forces targeted the youths during a cordon and search operation in the Ranbirgarh area of the Srinagar. The occupied valley has been under New Delhi's crushing curfew and communications blackout for the past 355 days. A Singaporean man has pleaded guilty to conducting espionage in the US to Chinese intelligence. In a statement, the US Justice Department said Jun Wei-Yo entered a guilty plea in a Washington court to charge of operating illegally as a foreign agent. Jun admitted to using his political consultancy to collect information for Beijing between 2015 and 19. Israel says its army helicopters have struck military targets in southern Syria. The Defense Ministry says the military carried out strikes in the retaliation for the earlier munitions fired from Syria towards Israel. No casualties have been reported so far. And in cricket, England will resume their first innings of third test against West Indies at Old Trafford. The hosts are at 258 for 4, with half-centuries from Early Polk, Rory Burns and Josh Butler. For West Indies, Kemar Roach picked 2 wickets, while Ruston Chase picked 1. News in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. We begin our bulletin from the United States, which has reported 1,157 COVID-19 deaths and over 73,000 cases in the last 24 hours. Now, the total number of infections in the country has surpassed 4.1 million, with nearly 146,000 deaths. In Brazil, 1,156 more people have died from the virus, increasing the tally to over 85,000. Worldwide, the death count has exceeded 638,000, while cases top 15.6 million. More in this report.
The coronavirus pandemic is accelerating rapidly, especially in the regions of Americas, Far East and South Africa. Mexico City's mayor has warned of a second wave of coronavirus as the cases top 370,000, with the total deaths crossing 42,000. The cases began to level off in mid-June, but recent numbers raise fears of a rebound of infections. In the US, the White House has pushed on its stance of reopening schools amid the pandemic. It said children should go back to school even if it turns out they are transmitting the deadly virus.
There have also been few reports of children being the primary source of COVID-19 transmission among family members. That's where the data currently stands. But that being said, even if there is transmission and later studies come out, let's say, we believe that students should be going back to school because the effect on a child, we know scientifically, they are not affected in the same way as an adult.
France has tested its water waste from the Paris sewage system once more after traces of COVID-19 were found in it at the end of June. But researchers said it did not show a surge of COVID-19 infection. Meanwhile, in the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson said we'll be past coronavirus by mid-2021, but warned of tough times ahead.
I think that by the middle of next year, we will be well on the way. We will be well on the way past it. But I must be clear with people. I do still think that we have tough times ahead in keeping this virus under control, and we have tough times ahead in coming through economically.
Elsewhere, mainland China has reported 34 new cases, all of which were domestically transmitted. South Korea has reported 113 new cases in the past 24 hours, which is its first daily jump above 100 in nearly 4 months. The country is struggling to contain a spike in fresh virus transmissions since early May, when it eased social distancing rules.
In Pakistan, 24 more people have died from the new coronavirus in the past day, raising the total to 5,787. The Health Ministry said 1,487 new cases were reported overnight as it only crossed 271,000. Officials said over 236,000 people have recovered from the virus so far. The ministry said there are now over 29,000 active cases in the country. Sindh remains the worst hit province with over 116,000 infections, while Punjab has reported over 91,000 cases. In Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, the affected tally is over 33,000, while there are over 11,000 cases in Balochistan. The capital city, Islamabad, has reported close to 15,000 cases, while Azad Jammu and Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan have nearly 4,000 cases. Now, Indian troops have martyred 2 more civilians in the occupied Kashmir. The occupation forces targeted the US during a cordon and search operation in the Ranbir Ghar area of the Srinagar. The troops have sealed all entry and exit points of the area. Indian atrocities in the occupied territories have sharply increased despite the COVID-19 outbreak. The occupied valley has been under New Delhi's crushing curfew and communications blackout for the past 355 days. Moving on, US Special Representative for Afghanistan, Zalmay Khalilzad, says the intra-Afghan talks have never been as close as they are now. Speaking at a virtual event organized by the US Institute of Peace, Khalilzad said the war has left huge burdens on the United States, Afghanistan and the world community. Khalilzad said the negotiations are a defining moment for Afghanistan as well as the region. He said casualties among the Afghan military personnel and civilians have been reduced this year as compared to last year. The envoy said Washington is committed to reducing troops in Afghanistan, but it will be conditional. Now, a Singaporean man has pleaded guilty to conducting espionage in the United States for Chinese intelligence. In a statement, the U.S. Justice Department said Jun Wei-Ye entered a guilty plea in a Washington court to one charge of operating illegally as a foreign agent. It said Jun used the consultancy to access and pay U.S. military and government employees with high-level security clearances. In a statement submitted to the court, he admitted using his political consultancy to collect information for Beijing between 2015 and 19. U.S. authorities have also arrested 4 Chinese academics in recent weeks, charging them over hiding their ties to China's People's Liberation Army. While China has urged Germany not to yield to the U.S. pressure to take sides in the ongoing tensions between Washington and Beijing, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi said Washington is creating an ideological confrontation and openly threatening other countries to pick sides. Now, in a virtual meeting with German counterpart Heiko Maas, Wang said Beijing will not allow Washington to impede China's progress. Maas stressed the need for dialogue with Beijing, saying Germany deems China as an important partner as well as a competitor. He told Wang it was important to uphold Hong Kong's autonomy and safeguard the freedoms guaranteed in basic law. This comes a day after U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo called for the creation of an anti-China alliance. Now, Israel says its army helicopters have struck military targets in southern Syria. The Defense Ministry said the military carried out strikes in retaliation for the earlier munitions fired from Syria towards Israel. The ministry said a number of targets were struck, including Syrian army's observation posts and intelligence collection system. Syria state media said Israeli helicopters targeted 3 outposts in the southern Quneitra area with anti-tank guided missiles. No casualties have been reported so far. The strikes came hours after America's top general, Mark Milley, made an unannounced visit to Israel for talks on regional security. Still in Israel, where the police have arrested 55 citizens for protesting near Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's residence in West Jerusalem. Thousands of demonstrators are venting their anger out against the Premier's mishandling of the coronavirus crisis and corruption charges. In a statement, the police said the arrests were made on the charges of causing public disturbance. It said that the police dispersed the protesters to restore the public order. Wearing protective masks, protesters shouted slogans and demanded Netanyahu's ouster. The demonstration started last month and police have arrested around 100 protesters over the past 2 weeks. And the UN Security Council has approved a request by the Libyan government of national accord to hold a session of the Sanctions Committee. Libya's envoy to the UN, Tahir El-Soni, said the session will be held at the end of July over violations of the arms embargo. Now, the request comes as part of GNA efforts to uncover countries that have provided support to militias. Meanwhile, the US military says Russia is breaching the UN arms embargo by continuously supporting its Wagner mercenaries in Libya. In a statement, US Africa Command said there is mounting evidence from satellite pictures of Moscow's cargo planes bringing supplies to Russian fighters. The Security Council imposed an open-ended embargo on Libya in 2011 to stop supplies of arms and military equipment to and from the country. Moving on, Iraq says 4 rockets struck a military base used by US-led coalition troops south of Baghdad. Now, in a statement, the military said the rockets hit Besmaya base and caused material damage but no casualties. In recent months, a number of rocket attacks have hit bases hosting coalition forces and landed near the US embassy in Baghdad. The United States blames Iran-backed militia groups, but no group has claimed responsibility for the attacks. In March, 2 Americans and 1 British soldier were killed following a barrage of rockets on Camp Taji. Now, Iran has accused the United States of risking a disaster after an American warplane's flyby of an Iranian civilian airline led to change altitude. In a tweet, Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said the U.S. harassed a scheduled civil airliner and endangered innocent passengers. State media reported several passengers were injured in the flight maneuver, but the U.S. military said the jet was at a safe distance. The plane belonging to Mahan Air was heading from Tehran to Beirut at the time. Earlier, Iran's foreign ministry said it will take political and legal measures after an investigation into the incident. Minister of Urban Development Mohammad Eslami said Tehran has lodged a complaint with the International Civil Aviation Organization. More news coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin says the ongoing border clashes between Azerbaijan and Armenia are highly sensitive for Moscow. Over a dozen Armenian and Azeri soldiers have been killed in clashes between the 2 former Soviet republics. With a military base in Armenia, Russia has urged the 2 sides for a ceasefire. Earlier, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres also urged Azerbaijan and Armenia to exercise maximum restraint. The 2 neighboring countries have long been in a conflict over the border region of Nagorno-Karabakh. International concern is heightened due to a threat to stability in a region serving as an energy corridor to the global markets. Russia says the UK and US accusations regarding its anti-satellite weaponry tests are a distortion of the truth. In a statement, the Defense Ministry says the test did not endanger other spacecraft. The ministry said the country's July 15 test did not violate any principles of international law. It said the UK and the US are accusing Russia to justify their weapons development in space. This comes after US State Department said Russian satellites actually appears to be in orbit anti-satellite weaponry. UK's Space Directorate also expressed concern over the tests and said the Russian satellite had the characteristics of a weapon. The US and Russia are to hold bilateral talks on space security in Vienna next week, the first since 2013. Well, now Turkey has slammed France for demanding European Union sanctions on Ankara over the Greek conflict. Foreign Ministry spokesman Hami Aksoy said Turkey cannot be threatened through sanctions. Aksoy said statements of France's President Emmanuel Macron have no value for the country. He said France has lost its neutrality and chance to contribute to stability in the eastern Mediterranean. Aksoy said Paris has not been able to get any results from its policies and will also fail in the future. The comments come after Macron demanded EU sanctions against Turkey, claiming violations of Greek and Cypriot waters. Moving on, Ethiopia says it has attained the first-year target of filling the Nile River dam amid talks to quell tensions with Sudan and Egypt. In a news briefing, Foreign Ministry spokesman Dina Mufti said the successful dam filling boosted Ethiopia's credibility on the international arena. He said Egypt, Sudan and Ethiopia have reached a common understanding on the issue. The spokesman said it was a victory for all three neighbors. Last Tuesday, the leaders of the three countries met virtually as part of continued negotiations on the operation of the Ethiopian Grand Renaissance Dam. The African Union started facilitating the trilateral talks in June after the US-sponsored negotiations collapsed in February. The United States has begun talks with Japan about deploying mobile American Marine units in Okinawa. In an interview, U.S. Marine Corps Commandant General David Berger said armed units will work closely with Japanese forces. The commandant said the deployment will prevent any potential adversary from taking the next move. Earlier in March, Berger published Force Design 2013 plan to trim aircraft numbers, dump Morse cannon artillery and cut heavy armor. This comes as Washington have accused Beijing of using the coronavirus pandemic to further territorial claims in the South China Sea. Beijing insists its intentions in the region are peaceful and has accused Washington of trying to drive a wedge between countries in Asia. Now, the US has approved a $634 million arms deal to upgrade Chile's F-16 Fighting Falcon combat jets. In a press release, the Defense Security Cooperation Agency said the State Department approved the proposal to Santiago. The agency said the move furthers U.S. foreign policy and national security objectives in South America. It said Lockheed Martin will be the principal contractor and the proposed sale will not alter the regional military balance. Santiago had requested to buy modernization equipment and services, including software upgrades and combined altitude radar altimeters. In the United States, federal agents have fired tear gas at Black Lives Matter demonstrators in Portland in a 56th straight day of protests. Positioned behind a steel fence, federal agents began firing tear gas after a small group of protesters lit fires at a building entrance. The agents declared the protests unlawful and forced people to move back from the federal courthouse. Security forces have frequently tear-gassed and clubbed demonstrators during the unrest. Anger is simmering among the public over the deployment of federal officers to Portland. U.S. President Donald Trump's administration has also hinted at sending a similar contingent to Seattle. Now, the UN Human Rights Office said the U.S. agents must not use disproportionate force against protesters and journalists. Britain says that about 30 million people in the country are to be offered the flu vaccine this year. In a statement, the government said this will prepare for a winter that can see the annual flu season coincide with a surge in coronavirus. The statement said the traditional flu program will include all people over the age of 50 for the first time and the people they live with. It said children in their first year of secondary school will also be offered the vaccine. Plans for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have not yet been announced. Social distancing and hygiene measures are in place to stop coronavirus from having an impact on the amount of flu going around. Now, in Hungary, thousands of protesters have taken to the streets of Budapest against perceived government attacks on media freedoms. 3 editors and more than 80 journalists of an online media outlet resigned after its owner refused to reinstate chief editor Zabolsk Dul. Dul's dismissal has increased concern that Prime Minister Viktor Orban's nationalist government is intensifying efforts to muzzle critical voices. Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó said his government was facing untrue accusations with respect to threats to media freedoms.
I have to listen to these false accusations all the time, and I always ask, tell me a concrete case. When could a journalist in Hungary not write what they thought? Which law prevents the press from being free in Hungary? There is no such law, and nobody has a reply for this question.
Well, Greek officials have now announced that a wildfire raging in its third day southwest of Athens has begun to die down. The blaze has been brought under control by a large deployment of over 300 firefighters and 90 fire engines. Fire brigade chief said the overall status of the situation has improved. The official added that the special disaster management units were operating in highly inaccessible areas where the flames had spread. Meanwhile, 2 new fires broke out on Friday near the town of Keratia in the East Attica and in the southern region of Peloponnese. However, the Keratia wildfire is relatively low risk for nearby residents as it broke out in an area of low vegetation. More than 40 countries have accused North Korea of illicitly breaching a UN cap on refined petroleum imports. They filed a complaint to the UN Security Council's Sanctions Committee for North Korea. In December 2017, the UN imposed an annual cap of 500,000 barrels in a bid to cut off fuel for North Korea's nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles programs. But the complaint said Pyongyang imported more than 1.6 million barrels of refined petroleum via 56 illicit tanker deliveries in the first 5 months of this year. The countries, including the US, UK and France, called for the immediate halt to deliveries until the end of the year. North Korea has been subjected to UN sanctions since 2006 over its nuclear and ballistic missiles programs. Russia has hailed a World Trade Organization ruling on the European Union's anti-dumping measures. Moscow had filed a complaint against EU anti-dumping measures in 2016. Russian Economy Minister Maxim said the ruling would improve access for Russian goods to the EU market. Meanwhile, Moscow's WTO negotiator Maxim Medvedkov said the bloc must reconsider its anti-dumping tariffs on imports of Russian pipes and fertilizers. Earlier, the WTO panel found that the EU cost adjustment methodology violates the trading body's anti-dumping rules. Now, both sides have 60 days to appeal the decision in the case. Now in cricket, England and opening day at 258 for 4 in the third and final test against West Indies at Old Trafford. After a shaky start, the hosts managed to consolidate with half-centuries from Oli Pope, Rory Burns and Joss Buttler. At stumps, Pope and Buttler were still unbeaten with the scores of 91 and 56 respectively. For West Indies, Kemar Rock picked 2 wickets while Ruston Chase picked 1. Jofra Archer was included in the team after missing the second test due to breaching the COVID-19 protocols. England won the second test by 113 runs to level the 3-match series. In football, Paris Saint-Germain beat 10-man Saint Etienne by 1-0 to win their 13th French Cup. Star striker Neymar hit the winner for the Parisians in what was the first game in France after the coronavirus ended the Ligue 1 in April. The Brazilian scored on the rebound in the 14th minute after goalkeeper Jesse Molin blocked Kylian Mbappe's shot. Saint Etienne captain Loic Perrin was sent off for a rough tackle on Mbappe, who was taken off injured in the 26th minute. About 5,000 fans were allowed inside the 80,000-seater Stade de France due to the strict health protocols. The French champions are chasing a quadruple of title this season after securing the League One title and the French Cup. English champions Liverpool beat Chelsea by 5-3 at Anfield to cap an entire league season undefeated at home. Injured Liverpool captain Jordan Henderson lifted the EPL trophy in a closed ceremony after the match in front of an empty cup. Reds raced into a 3-0 lead via goals from Naby Keita, Trent Alexander-Arnold and Georgiana Jandol before Olivier Giroud pulled one back. Roberto Firmino restored the 3-goal cushion, but the victors rode back through Tammy Abraham and Christian Pulisic. Alex Oxlade strike 6 minutes from time put the results beyond any doubt as the champions moved on to 96 points. Chelsea now needs a point against Wolverhampton Wanderers in their fixture to qualify next season's Champions League. Well, that's all for now. Now, for the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Take care.